clicking on this video. In this track, we talked about rejuvenating democracies, and we're joined by Mike Donofrio, a partner and pro bono practice leader at the law firm Strisson Marr. We discussed questions like how might we rejuvenate local democracies, and provocations like 11,000 representatives in the House of Reps. I love this conversation, and I think you will too. So without further ado, here's the track. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Trek. The Trek is a Civics Unplugged series where community members participate in meaningful discussions on topics that are too often neglected when thinking about building the future. Through prompting questions and provocations, we venture together into complex but important conversations related to building the future and democracy. We understand that this work requires ongoing dialogue, but it's a journey worth trekking through. My name is Ashley Lynn. I'm 17 from Vancouver, Washington, and I am joined today by some of our amazing CU community members and a special guest. So our topic today is rejuvenating democracy, and as always, we will start with the word association. So Anna, take it away.
I mean, word association. Struggle. And gosh, I cannot think of anything eloquent other than just bad. Collaboration.
Hey everyone, so I'm Jae-Hee and I'm a high school junior from Dayton, Ohio, and I would associate rejuvenating democracy with the words high stakes because I think that on both very polarized ends, we're dealing with people who are trying to grapple with fundamental changes in what even makes an election legitimate, and I think that it's very dangerous ground that we're charting right now.
Hey, I'm Madison. I'm a high school senior from Verdigris, Oklahoma, and my word association would be rethinking, because if we want to rejuvenate democracy, we can't look back for old solutions. As the Rethinking Humanity report says, we need to rethink what it means to participate in democracy and to have a democratic society.
I'm Ella. I'm from Washington. And I think that some words to describe rejuvenating democracy would be long-term process.
And I'm Mike. I'm a lawyer from Montpelier, Vermont. I have two words in mind that I hope to explore in our discussion today: mistrust and optimism.
That is really cool because my two words were trust and spirit. I think we need a little bit of both to help our democracy move forward. Okay, cool. I think those are awesome word associations. Does anyone have a question or provocation to get us started?
What does our democracy situation look like right now?
I mean, struggle, high stakes, mistrust, these are all accurate descriptors. It's so like I said, I'm a lawyer, and I've done really just in the past year, I've shifted my law practice into voting rights and democracy reform pro bono work. And from that perspective, honestly, it's sort of grim. You've probably all heard about laws passing in various states in response to the 2020 election that are going to curtail voting rights, are going to curtail participation. That's all really bad. There's no way around that. And then, in the meantime, the playing field has been horribly skewed by partisan gerrymandering, our campaign finance system through the lens of the Citizens United decision. So these are all tremendous challenges, to Ella's long-term process point. The reason why I said optimism is because as sort of a counterbalance to all of that, and to spending a lot of my time working on cases that feels like you're just putting your finger in the hole of a dam and there's 17,000 other holes. I've been trying to engage with groups like Civics Unplugged, because I honestly think that you all, like your generation, I see it with my own kids there, and that's why I said optimism. I think that it's time, and I think people like me are starting to see that we need to get behind you and just push and work and not lead and talk even as much as I am right now. So I think that sort of answered your question.
I had a similar question when Ashley asked for open-ended questions. I was thinking, what part are we trying to rejuvenate? Democracy to me is so broad. I think of my mother being able to go to the grocery store and get organic food that fits our family who has different allergies and needs and dietary restrictions. I think of that as democracy.
Mm-hmm.
So also, I didn't mean to pose a whole new question. It could be part of the earlier question, but it can be a whole new question too. I think of every part of our lives as democracy. So to me, rejuvenating democracy includes Medicare for all, it includes fresh food, it includes climate action, which is why this track could be a series of like 50 tracks. Yeah. So I think it's important maybe for us to zero in on like what Mike was talking about, which is partisanship and the government itself, which I don't think of as democracy, interestingly enough. I think of my day-to-day life more as democracy, and my local elections more as democracy than I do of the administration, which is a bad sign and a sign of rejuvenation that is needed. And I'd say something that really pops into my head of rejuvenation is when it cleans out money in politics. That's a good step. A word association I have with rejuvenate is like smoothie shops, like that kind of thing, which is why I think of like a juice cleanse, like we need to like cleanse out corporate money and corrupt politicians. I don't know how. I do a lot of advocacy, but not civics advocacy. I work on climate justice. So I haven't worked in the field of like campaign finance and like money issues, but it's definitely a massive problem. I did some corporate tracking recently, and my state legislators have their money tied up every which way, like so many biases.
Which state are you in, Anna? I forget.
Oh, I'm in Maine.
Okay. Yeah.
And so there's this big opposition to something called the CMP corridor in Maine, and our governor has direct money ties to the board, and it's just it's so frustrating to get anything done on like trying to oppose the corridor because of that.
Yeah. May I say just one quick thing in response to Anna's comments? I think I mean, of course you're right that democracy is extremely broad and it's kind of everything. And the way I think about it, and it's just the way I think about it, it's to try to organize all of that in my head. There are substantive issues and problems like climate and food security and healthcare, and those are all inextricably tied to democracy. They're the product of it, and they also set the conditions for it. And so that's one lens that I look through. And then the other lens I look through is, and this is where it gets like kind of technical and lawyery, but the laws and norms and institutions that are supposed to like put our democracy into action, so that's where I think about gerrymandering and campaign finance and, getting rid of the filibuster and reforming the Senate and the Electoral College and things like that. They're all really linked, but that's just one way I try to keep it organized in my head, is I think about democracy in practice as it affects these substantive areas that you mentioned. And then I think about like the structure of democracy and the the machine, like how the machine is configured. And it's in my opinion, it's very, very misconfigured. It's been very misconfigured by money and bad Supreme Court decisions and the like.
When I think of democracy, I personally think of voting as kind of like my main view on democracy, and I feel like the whole point of a democratic government is that it's for the people. And I feel when Mike brought up gerrymandering and all that stuff, I feel like it's increasingly becoming to a point where the government is trying to control our voice and our voting by gerrymandering and especially the Electoral College, and just trying to manipulate the system, even though it's supposed to be input from the people.
I think those are all really good points. Something else I think about too, like part of why my word associations were like spirit and trust is because I feel like so often like democracy and citizenship like is reduced to voting, where like people think that like if they like vote once every 4 years, maybe not even for local elections, right? Like if they vote once every 4 years, they they like have upheld their like responsibilities of being a citizen, and like that practice like by itself is what forms like a democratic society. And I just feel like decision making and taking responsibility like is something that should transcend the voting booth, right? And so I guess a lot of what I think about is, well, how do we create like communities that like can support each other, and communities who like take initiative to make their community better, and to yeah. So I don't know, I think there's that tension of like, oh, like so much of like who votes and like campaign finance and stuff like that, like that's like very like structural things where like everyday individuals find it very hard to kind of like plug in to like how they might shift that system. But also there are so many things that we can do as individuals to build civic character within our communities. And so like that's like something that I grapple with as well.
Yeah, yeah, I really resonate with the idea that like people don't find local elections important. I also think that a big part of rejuvenating democracy is the public's perception of democracy. Um, there's this issue of overly celebrating politicians. Politicians are meant to serve the people, and we like keep praising them for doing their jobs, and for doing what they're meant to do, which I find very frustrating. But I also take part in myself. I'm not free from this criticism as someone who was a Bernie Sanders stan, and I stand by that, and because it was part of, I really respect the ideology. But today, I think that there needs to be a healthy amount of criticism for politicians, but also more faith in the system overall. We not only that it can work, but we can make it work. People aren't talking about rejuvenating democracy. People are talking about how democracy is broken, and that's a big problem. We need to be talking about how we can fix it and we can rebuild it, not just that it sucks.
Can I jump in on that? One of the things that I learned about recently, and that and the reason why I included the word optimism. So Anna, you're exactly right. There are, when you zoom away from, say, presidential politics or the goings on in Congress, and you start to look around, you see tremendous democratic, with a small d, successes that occurred because people worked, people engaged in their communities about an issue that they cared about, and they defied the political expectations that exist, at kind of that national discussion level. So an incredible example is Idaho, which, when you think of Idaho through that sort of national political lens, like through presidential politics, you think Idaho is an extremely red state. But the voters of the state of Idaho voted over 60% to expand Medicaid, which has been, again, at the national level, a huge talking point for conservative Republicans. And most red states have refused to do it on purely political grounds, even though it's financially hugely beneficial for all of their citizens. So folks in Idaho got together, drove around, talked to everyone, and said, here's what would happen if we expanded Medicaid. And voters who probably in every other walk of their voting lives, voted for President Trump, you know what I mean? They were like, oh, this would actually help my family and I. And so change happened and reform happened because, and I think this sort of connects with what Ashley was saying about communities, moving and working together. I think that's really where, and that's why I say I feel like as a lawyer, I'm putting fingers in little holes in the dam, and I'm not sure if that's the best use of my time, when I look at efforts like that.
I really agree with what Anna said about the over celebrating politicians. I just wanted to make a quick point that I like the senator position, like it's such a glamorized job today, but really these people are supposed to be public servants, and it's supposed to be really a part-time job, and it's supposed to be part of input by the people. It's ordinary citizens helping out with the normal government, but it's become such a glamorized position that it's becoming like less of the people and more of a group of politically minded people who aren't really concerned with the interests of the general population. That's not a great way to word it, but yeah.
I will also say that we over glamorize or like overemphasize individuals, and we also do the same for political parties. And so it's almost like, people like can't even think for themselves anymore, which is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I think personally, I tend to focus on ideology more than people. I always appreciate representation. Like, yes, I do tend to really celebrate when there was someone I was working to help elect who became the first transgender representative in Vermont. So that's really cool. But then, for example, I didn't like Bernie because he was an old white guy. That's the fact that I hated about Bernie. I loved his ideology. And there were parts of his ideology that I disagreed with. I think that there should be a private option for Medicare for all. I don't think we should have it be entirely public. But it was the brand, and it was the movement, and it was the energy, and it really made me feel more hopeful in democracy. But at the same time, it was exclusive. People who liked Bloomberg, people who liked Buttigieg. I remember when I first got engaged with the Bernie community, I hadn't been really educated well enough yet about policy because I was I was like 12. I'm 14 now, so it's not a huge difference. But I didn't know as much about politics as I do now. And I said something about Buttigieg, and I just got attacked, like totally dogpiled. Like, I can't believe you'd support him. And I was like, "Ooh, well, my bad." And if you don't look too closely, the ideology isn't that different. It's more about exact plans. So I think that ideology creates movements, and it brings people together, and it's really important for rejuvenating democracy, but it's also really alienating. And I don't have an answer. Like, this is not a helpful comment because this is something people have been tossing back and forth for ages. Like, how do you have both? I don't know.
I think that's a really important point that you brought up, because I think that if we kind of look at how like Trump's entire campaign work, his primary source of resonance was like identity based politics. He tried to appeal to like our emotions and our pathos rather than clear like sources of reasons and ideologies. And I think that kind of reflects our how we discuss like about the over glamorization of politicians, because we have begun to see them as almost as these avatars, and that feels like a parallel to like how there is a growing distance between politics and community, even though politics is supposed to be for the people. I'm thinking that it probably has to do something with the media. We have distanced ourselves, at least I have seen myself distance myself from local news and look towards national television, national sources of media, because that's just kind of what's more flashy and more appealing. But then when we do that, we kind of stray away from things that are more practical, and then we go into the theoretical realms. That probably also makes us more vulnerable to accepting misinformation and all sorts of other threats to our democracy.
That makes me want to pose the question, how might we rejuvenate local democracy, if that is a thing?
Off the top of my head, I would totally advocate for civic education to be included in the K to 12 curriculum for sure.
I think there are a lot of, in addition to that, a lot of really like nuts and bolts practical changes that could be made to make local democratic processes more accessible and more participatory. So, thinking about making sure there are, wide windows for early voting. The whole idea of election day is to me a very undemocratic with a small d idea. The fact that people have to rearrange their schedules for this one particular window of time in order to participate in democracy. So, I think things like early voting, mail-in voting, I think are very, in my opinion, are very positive steps and possibilities. And then I think the education piece is so critical, because at the local level, there actually are a lot of opportunities for people to engage if they're aware of them and interested. And there's a lot of good, there's a lot of support out there in the literature for the incredible benefits to society and to each of us as an individual when we do participate in local government. It allows us to get to talk to our fellow community members and get things done, instead of living in the theoretical realm that you referred to. That's kind of, and you used the word pathos, which I thought was a excellent word to connect to that part of our civic life. It's pathos filled at the moment.
Another really important aspect is giving local democracies and states more agency. To use a term that was popularized during the 80s in the Reagan administration, is that states should be laboratories of democracy, subsidiarity. How can we expect, we tend to nationalize everything now, and a lot of solutions just can't be nationalized just because people in different places want different things and different solutions work according to different populations and geographies. And so I think if we want to rejuvenate local democracies, we need to give them their power to do what works best for them and their people.
Absolutely.
Local democracy is interesting because I've seen rejuvenation happen in the wrong ways. So the right outcome in the wrong way. For example, people don't have the time to really learn about politicians and what they care about. And I've seen this effect in my town, where we've gotten people to vote in local elections by just sending them a pamphlet that just tells them who to vote for. That's a problem. We shouldn't have that. My town Democrats just send a thing these are the Democrats on the ballot, and then people just bring the pamphlet and then mark their names. And that's not a good idea. And that's why civic education is really important. It's rejuvenating the right way. Also, lowering the voting age. I agree with everything you said, Mike, about how voting day is undemocratic, but also our voting age is really undemocratic. And it's been proven through studies that voting turnout is increased by having lower voting age across all age groups. So not just because there's more of a voting population, but because the younger generation energizes everyone to vote. And it's really important. So that's actually my last comment, because I do have to go now. I'm sorry to leave early, but I had to hop onto another call. So bye.
Thank you.
To rejuvenate local democracies, I I realize just like how much like importance is placed on the national elections, and I barely know what's like what issues or what we're trying to improve in my own local government. And I definitely agree with Anna in saying that we really have to, and everyone who already said it, who says they really have to educate voters so that they actually know what they're voting for, and so that they're not completely like oblivious to what the local government is doing. And local governments affect people so much more directly than the national governments actually do. So I think it's really important to raise participation in local governments.
Yeah, I will add too, and this might be like not what most people think about when they think about local democracies. But I guess like I just think about the fact that like decision making and power like doesn't necessarily have to reside in governmental institutions, right? I think there's a lot of room for people like I mean, I guess when I think about building local democracies, like I think about like how might we help more people practice power, right? And that can come from like serving like on like the board for your library association, right? Or like joining the neighborhood council. Like I don't know, but like so much of it is like how do I like start taking responsibility for the things closest to me, and how do I practice decision making? And so when I like build up these skills, I can then apply them to like to things maybe outside of my local community. But like I guess it's just really crazy to me how we like expect young people. It's like we treat them like they can't make any decisions, and we put them in like these like safe school containers until they're like 18, and then we tell them, and now go vote. I'm like, we have had no practice, and this isn't just something that like you just tell people to randomly do, right? Like I think it's important to um, yeah, just to help people like be able to like consume information and make sense of it and make decisions and get people on board, and like I think these are all skills that need to be practiced.
Ashley made a really good point. Just like I feel like people once they do reach voting age, and that's why voter turnout is so low among young members of the community. It's just they once they're allowed to vote, they're just like I don't know anything about these candidates. I don't know anything about any of these issues. So like why should I vote? I'm not informed or anything like that. But and that definitely needs to be changed by letting the people know about issues affecting their community and about candidates and stuff while they're still in school. They just need kind of an unbiased, especially emphasis on unbiased, like review of candidates and issues and stuff like that, so that they can make their own decisions when they're old enough to vote.
Can I ask a question just following up on that directly? Do you, and for everyone, do you think on a very like nuts and bolts level, do you think early voting, and by that I mean you would receive, let's say you'd receive your ballot in the mail a month before an election, and the rule would be you could return that ballot, anytime up until whatever 7 p.m. on election day. Do you think that would assist younger voters in being able to kind of inform themselves in the way that Ella described? Do you think that would increase, participation and, a more sort of informed and engaged decision making among younger voters?
That would definitely help me, because I feel like if I was to just if I was to have like to be able to vote on like the election day and have to actually like only have one day to prepare and all that, I feel like a mail-in ballot would kind of give me time to like read everything on the ballot and research give me enough time to research all of it, which you might not have if you're in a ballot box. But I really like that idea.
Yeah, I think obviously it's hard to say without like statistics or whatever, but me just reasoning through it, it seems like yes, for convenience and comfort. So anytime you're removing an obstacle of like having to go to the polls and wait in line, and it just shows up at my door and I can vote when I want to and when it's convenient for me. And also, like Elle mentioned, comfort. If I'm feeling pressured to, for some reason, make my vote in like 30 seconds, or if I need to take time to really like deeply think about it, it would seem to me like people would be more willing to both like participate and make more informed. But it's an interesting thought.
Um, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I definitely think that it would help, but maybe in like a smaller demographic than we would like to. Probably mostly for people who are already planning to vote, and it would just make the process more easier for them. However, for those who haven't actually been exposed to this conversation and never had like a seat on this table before, I wish there was like a better way to bring them into the conversation, and that kind of like brings me back to the education system in general, because these days the curriculum focuses on us kind of uh, shoving information down our throats, regurgitating it, and it's like a very passive method of navigating like how we understand the world. Whereas like voting for elections requires you to do very objective research, and you have to use reasoning skills, and that's like so far away from what we've learned in school, so that most of us just end up voting for what our parents think. And I do see a lot of like outliers in this. I have a lot of friends who have different ideologies than their parents, but I think in the population where we most want to see increased engagement in, that might not work. So I'm wondering, how can we go even a step further than this adjustment?
Yeah, Jae-Hee, I'm glad you brought that up. I was thinking about it, and it could actually make it a lot harder for people depending on who you are and what state you're in. So I know that for mail-in ballots, there can be a lot more rules and like regulations for like things that you have to do specifically like paperwork wise in order to actually have your vote count. Like I don't remember what state it was, but there was like some weird like signature laws, like you had to sign the thing in like specific places, and a lot of people wouldn't know to do that unless they were told from other sources. So again, it just depends.
Yeah, I mean, that is exactly right, Madison. Um, there are all different models across the states of how these, mail-in voting is administered. And there are, although I think that just like at the 30,000 foot level, I think the concept of, early voting and mail-in voting is pro small d democracy. You are 100% correct that in practice, there are states that have placed barriers, in a specific way that, my opinion is designed to maximize the likelihood of a particular outcome. So I think that, when I say that I think it's pro democracy, I mean that in a kind of idealized sense. There is a lot of work to be done out there across the states to make it an actually pro democratic process in a lot of jurisdictions. I will say I did a lot of work around curing defective mail-in ballots that had been mailed in early in various states leading up to the election. And I was generally really impressed. And these were states across the political spectrum, with the systems that these states had in place to very quickly identify and notify voters that the ballot that came in the mail had an issue that had to be fixed, and telling the voters how to fix the problems. I was surprised, actually, because like I said, I was working in some different jurisdictions. I was surprised at how across the board, my impression was that worked reasonably well, and the outreach was pretty good. Can I ask another question? Just throw another question out. So, I think on some super basic level, what we've been talking about here is like representativeness, if I can make up a word, and trying to envision systems that are more representative, more participatory. And several of you made comments about how politicians and political parties have almost been glamorized and taken on a certain type of role that sort of cuts against representativeness. A friend of mine Ethan Zuckerman, who's a wonderful thinker on this and many other topics, who I really recommend checking out his work. He published a short article in Politico a few years ago where he suggested that the House of Representatives should have about 11,000 members. This is using George Washington's original vision of one rep per 30,000 people. And then Ethan's point is the institution would then be this diffuse decision-making body. They wouldn't all come to Washington. They would just have their constituent offices, and they would be in touch with their community of 30,000 constituents. I mean, in a way, it's a very wild idea when you think about, going from 435 people sitting in the same building to that. But I'm curious for folks' reactions. I find it a very interesting idea.
I think that it sounds like a very radical but very amazing idea, because what we really need is to kind of like restore the intimacy that we've lost with politics. And I think that giving people this opportunity, because a lot of the lack of participation isn't because they're disinterested, but they're kind of like caught in their own worlds of living day to day, surviving from dinner to dinner. And so if they have someone that they can say, oh, this person is here to represent me, I think we can restore that spirit again.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of benefit to like having when you come closer to a direct democracy like this, but there's also a lot of like setbacks. If you think about the status quo, a lot of people don't know their like US reps or senators, and much less know like their state representatives or state senators. And so if we're having trouble when people have like 2 senators per state, and I mean, I just don't know the likelihood that like these representatives would actually be like held accountable, or if people would even be engaged enough for it to have any like meaningful effect for the majority of the population.
Madison, do you think under a scenario like this, where each representative, their constituency would be about 30,000 people, do you see any possibility that that would maximize, the likelihood that people would at least get to know that person, because that person would be, it wouldn't be a senator with the statewide representation, or are you, I mean, you also referenced state politics. So, are you thinking like, look, a lot of people don't even know their local, rep in their local state house. So why do we think this is going to work?
Yeah, maybe I'm pessimistic, but I just like doubt like that people would really be engaged enough to really want this. And also like when you get into things like having 11,000 representatives, I'm just trying to think through this. I could see a lot of issues within like trying to get legislation passed. Like it's one thing when you're having to work across the aisle with like a couple hundred people and try and get voices in, but when you have so many different like ideologies and interests represented and you're trying to get legislation that actually passes, I could see that posing a challenge as well.
Madison, I was actually thinking about the same thing. I was wondering like how mobile can something this massive be? And then I was reminded of like what we learned about in the Rethink X report when they were talking about how with expanding technological capabilities, we also have to adapt our organizational capabilities. And so what if we're able to kind of like compound the two? So we have a lot of tech that's evolved, and maybe we can create like a very streamlined, effective system online, as we have seen in the pandemic, and try to be able to have that much reach and have that much capacity with the same efficacy.
I really agree with Jae-Hee. It what I've learned during the pandemic is that that like for example, I'm part of this organization, and I wasn't able to be part of it before because it was just based out of a couple cities. But then when they moved online, I could still do it, and I feel like if I feel like technology and stuff will give people more of an opportunity to reach more people, and like kind of it would give the representatives like a chance to like get to know more about the people that they're representing, and of course for the people to know more about their representative. And this kind of goes back to the point of participating in local democracy, which is going to directly affect the people, and so they should know who's going to be representing them.
Do you think that this scenario would, I think it's possible a scenario like this would help get rid of some of the distorting influence of money in politics, through lobbying and through campaign finance? What does anyone have a reaction along that particular point?
I agree. And I think like along the same line of us like glorifying individuals, maybe this isn't like wouldn't have a direct correlation, but I could see it like being a lot harder to put emphasis on specific reps if there's like 11,000 of them.
Yeah.
And then like one person doesn't have as much control like over the entire body. So I think that like, and then what you said as well, like obviously it's one thing to pay like a couple hundred representatives off in like lobbying, but it's another thing to try and get like 5,000 or 6,000. So I could definitely see that helping.
Coming back to like that a lot of politics is filled with money. I feel like a big divide between the representative and the people that they're representing is like the very targeted demographic that that most representatives are, because it's quite expensive to run for any office because of all the campaigning you have to do. So not as much for local, but definitely for statewide and national elections, you have to be able to fund your campaign, and it's kind of closing off your campaigning to people who can afford it, middle upper class and upper class people. So you're not really it becomes difficult to represent people who need a lot of help, like people lower class people, and it's just not very it's just not a very good, like the person who is elected just doesn't become a very good representative because they can't relate to as many people.
I agree. And I just thought of another benefit. You all are convincing me. Basically, if you think about it, most representatives are campaigning to people that they've never met before. So like they get to like signal like this is who I am because of my experience and like whatever else. But if you do it for like a community of 30,000 people, there's kind of like no excuse to not know like the person. And I think that would help a lot with people who tend to, with both like politicians who are able to like virtue signal about like certain traits they have or like what they believe in, and then like actually, and then also people like voting for just like people that they actually know and trust. So that would be another cool added benefit.
I'm going to hop on the added benefit train and say that maybe this will also help. I think Mike mentioned this earlier, but with just general transparency, since there's going to be more like a bigger tent, more people involved, more guardrails against like secrecy and then like schemes. If we have more eyes and ears inside where everything is happening, the doors will be less closed, I hope.
And one kind of like in the weeds advantage or benefit of this plan, it wouldn't require a constitutional amendment. There's nothing in the Constitution that sets that size. It's done by statute, and the statute that currently defines the size of the House was enacted, I believe, in the 1920s. We don't have to think about the amendment process and running all those traps in order to make a change like this. However, it would take a majority of the current 435 reps in the House to decide to greatly diminish their own personal power. So there is that, practical reality to consider. Yes, agreed, Ashley. I mean, I'll keep throwing stuff out if it's okay. I don't want to like, okay. So I've been really into the work of my friend Ethan lately. So I'm gonna quote him again. He just published a book that's, it's an amazing and profound book, and it runs all through this conversation. And the title of the book is Mistrust: Why Losing Faith in Institutions Provides the Tools to Transform Them. And that was really why my two words at the beginning were mistrust and optimism, because I've been thinking so much about that. And Ethan's way smarter than me, and he's done some amazing analysis in the book to kind of support this thesis that this moment of mistrust that we're living through, and that feels very scary to me, is actually has enormous potential. I'd love to just stop talking and see your reactions.
This is a really interesting point. I think that when people are mistrustful of the government, when people don't like something, they're going to try to change it. And I feel like, I don't know if that's exactly what you mean, but that's what I interpret of it. And if people don't like a candidate, then they'll try to reelect someone. If people don't like an issue, then they'll campaign and try to fix that issue. And it ends up making the community better.
Yeah, another interesting thing we talked about at our lesson this week for CU is that when that voter turnout rate isn't always a great indication of like how democracy's doing, because when there's higher voter rates, it's because people have a reason to pay attention. For instance, in the 2020 election, when a lot of people weren't satisfied with the current president, so it motivated a lot of people to go out and vote. And so it really just like, when there's losing faith in institutions, like it gives people a reason to care about what's going on. And like when they're not happy with the status quo, they're just going to be looking for something different and ways to transform them.
Think about like, I mean, like Rethink Community talks about like breakthrough versus collapse, right? So like, but at the same time, it's like sometimes we do need to go through a collapse of current institutions so new things can emerge, right? Like if you try to preserve old structures forever, like, and expect progress, like you're like expecting two like opposite things, right? So I don't know. I guess I also think about the need for, I mean, I know I personally would prefer to see a broken institution clearly and lose faith, and try to think of solutions versus um, like not seeing it as like at all, and just like being happy with the status quo. Okay. But that was a great provocation. I'm going to move us into the reflection application section, and I will drop the link to this in the chat. If you want to go back and look at kind of what we talked about. But yeah, does anybody want to start off with your reflection? And we can go in any order.
Sure. I think my first application would be I gotta check out the book that Mike recommended. But I really appreciated how he brought in tangible like infrastructure solutions into the conversation that I would totally love to explore more through the book. And I think that at least from like the one example he gave, it was more of like adapting our organization to fulfill the needs of the modern age compared to what we have in the 20th century. And we've kind of evolved into having like monopolies in terms of almost everything actually in our economy and our politics, and kind of straying away from that. It's going to be difficult, but given the high pressure environment we have right now, maybe that will give like the politicians the nudge to shift the status quo.
I just want to say, go ahead.
I now have a lot of things to read apparently, but I really like the mistrust provides tools to transform things, and it kind of ties together this whole conversation. If people feel like the government they feel like government processes can be changed, if they feel like their local government should change, if they feel like there should be more transparency, if there should be more trust in representatives, then they're going to change it. And ultimately, these processes are going to change, and they're going to get more participation.
Yeah, I just want to thank Mike for bringing up that proposal of, the 11,000 reps, because when we have conversations around rejuvenating democracy, it should be things like that. Of course, the theoretical is helpful as well, but I think right now when people think about what like the future of democracy looks like, it's what's going to happen within the next 5 or 10 years, and it's about people, like who's going to run for president, who's going to do this or that, right? When in reality, if we want to really create something that's going to last and suit our needs in the future, it should be about solutions like that. and while there are like a lot of things to consider about like whether solutions like that are going to be viable, we won't know until we start talking about it and getting people's thoughts and contributions to see if that's something that we want our future to look like.
My primary reflection is that I could continue this conversation for about a week. And I would like to start a think tank with this group and just and keep doing this. So I'm so grateful for this conversation, and your just, brilliant thoughts, and you've confirmed what I said at the beginning about this kind of journey that I've been on that's taken me into some very dark corners of, the litigation world, but at the same time, given me open my eyes to things that are going on that are extremely exciting and promising. And Civics Unplugged is clearly one of them. So thank you. And needless to say, if there's anything we talked about that you want to follow up on and you think I can be helpful, just, I guess, Nick has my email. I think maybe Ashley scheduled this session. She has my email. I'll just put it in the chat.
Yeah, well, thank you just so much for joining us, Mike. This was really incredible. And I know all of us just really appreciated the insight and provocations that you brought. So yeah, would love to. I mean, I know you already started sharing a bit, but just any thoughts on the structure of the track, in general?
I mean, just based on how great this conversation was, I think it seems like it is a very effective, model for having these conversations and these, allowing everyone to, think and participate and, learn.
Awesome. That's good to hear. We've iterated
I
on
don't
this
know
a
if
couple
I
times.
don't know if you want people to keep coming back and doing more of them, but I mean, I would do this again in a heartbeat.
Yes, come back.
Yeah, it'd be my
We
pleasure.
would love to have you back. Yeah,
all right.
That would be
Well,
really
let
cool.
me, I'm in the middle of some, well, I guess I'm at the beginning of some interesting new projects. So, let some of that sift around, and I'll try to come up with a good kind of follow-up theme. And should I contact Nick?
Yeah, Nick, or yeah, if Nick is the person that you've been reaching out to, it'd probably be a good contact.
Honestly, I reached out to him sort of randomly because I heard a podcast, How We Fix It. It was that series, and several, I don't remember the names. I'll be embarrassed if any of you were on it, but four CU fellows spoke, and I was just like, holy cow, I need to learn more about this. So I looked it up on LinkedIn, and Nick's thing came up, and I was just like, hey, I want to get involved. So we had a nice call, and that's how this happened.
That's very cool. Yeah, I didn't know people actually discovered us through podcasts. So, but yeah, Gary, I dropped his email in the chat. He would be a good person to reach out to. But yeah, like we've been experimenting with like different versions of like recurring series and different things like that. So I
Mhm.
don't know, definitely room for like experimentation there.
Great.
Yeah, it was just super awesome speaking with all of you today. So thank you all so much just for being on the track and for this amazing conversation. And I hope you all have an amazing rest of your week, and I'll see everyone next time.
Thanks so much. Good
Yeah,
night, everyone.
Bye.
bye.
Bye.